Chapter 1. The number on the refrigerator. Alice Green had reached that stage of life where peace felt expensive. Not financially, emotionally. At 25 she had thought excitement was valuable. At 30 she had believed passion mattered most. At 41 she had discovered the hidden luxury of waking up without chaos waiting for her. Chaos was exhausting. Peace was rare. That realization came to her while standing in her kitchen at 7:30 on a Sunday evening, staring at a phone number held to her refrigerator by a magnet shaped like a pineapple. The number had been sitting there for almost 4 hours. She had moved it twice. Not because she intended to call, because she couldn't decide where to put it. That felt symbolic somehow. Odin sat beside her, his blue eyes fixed on the paper. The husky let out a low grumble. "You don't know what that is," he answered with a dramatic groan. Alice sighed. "You're remarkably judgmental for someone who ate an entire couch cushion." His ears perked up. "No shame. None whatsoever." "Exactly." The dog rose to his feet and wandered toward his water bowl. Alice looked back at the number. The handwriting belonged to her mother. Large loops, perfectly readable, impossible to ignore. She still couldn't believe the conversation from brunch. Her mother had delivered the news with all the casualness of discussing weather forecasts. "Oh, I saw Michael at the mall yesterday." Just like that. No warning. No preparation. The first man Alice had ever genuinely expected to marry. The one who had disappeared from her life with a letter. Not an angry letter. That would have been easier. Anger could be dismissed. What he left behind had been thoughtful, reasonable, painfully accurate. At the time she'd hated every word. Years later she'd realized he was right. Every single word. Alice grabbed a bottle of water from the refrigerator. The phone number fluttered when the door opened. Still there. Waiting. Judging. Like Odin. The husky had returned and was now staring at her again. "You have no useful input," Odin barked. Once. Alice narrowed her eyes. Was that sarcasm? Another bark. She pointed at him. "Don't start." The dog sat down, looking entirely too satisfied. Alice laughed despite herself. Living alone had resulted in far more conversations with her dog than she'd ever intended. Though in fairness, Odin contributed more than some of the men she dated. The thought made her wince. That was enough reminiscing. She grabbed the paper, walked into the living room, sat on the couch, stared at the number, then stared some more. It wasn't fear exactly. At least she didn't think it was. The old Alice would have called immediately, or never called at all. She had once been a woman of extremes. Now she preferred intentional decisions. Unfortunately, intentional decisions took longer. Her thumb hovered over her phone screen. She lowered it, picked it back up, lowered it again. "This is ridiculous." Odin sneezed. "You're right." Finally she entered the number. Before courage could escape, she pressed the call button. The ringing started immediately. Alice's stomach tightened. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. Maybe he wouldn't answer. That would be convenient. 4 rings, 5. Then a click. A man's voice. "Hello." Alice froze. Her brain immediately abandoned all prepared thoughts. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. 41 years old and apparently incapable of handling a phone call. "Hello." The voice sounded older, deeper, familiar. Then realization entered his tone. "Alice." She swallowed. "Hi." A brief silence followed. Not awkward, just surprised. "Well," he said, "that's a voice I haven't heard in a while." She laughed nervously. "That's one way to put it. How are you?" The simplicity of the question caught her off guard. No bitterness, no accusation, just curiosity. "I'm good." A pause. "Actually, that's true. I never know how to answer that question, but I'm genuinely good." "I'm glad." The warmth in his voice surprised her. More than it should have. She shifted on the couch. "My mother gave me your number. I assumed she might. She mentioned running into you. Your mother is exactly the same." Alice smiled. "She'll be happy to hear that." She remembered my coffee order. Alice blinked. "What?" When she saw me she asked if I still drank coffee with too much cream. Alice laughed. "That sounds like her." It was honestly impressive. The tension eased. Just a little. For several minutes they exchanged the safe details. Work, family, life. Nothing dangerous, nothing painful. Then eventually silence settled between them. Not empty, expectant. Alice knew what came next. The reason for the call. The reason for the number. The reason her mother had looked at her so carefully during brunch. She took a breath. "Michael." "Yeah. I owe you an apology." The silence that followed was longer this time. Gentler. Finally he spoke. "You don't have to do that over the phone." Her fingers tightened around the cell phone. "You don't think I should? I think we should have that conversation face to face." Alice blinked. "What?" He chuckled. "That sounded more shocking than I intended." "A little." Another laugh. The same laugh she remembered. Older now, but still familiar. "We could meet for coffee." Alice closed her eyes. Of course it would be coffee. Life occasionally possessed an obnoxious sense of humor. Michael seemed to recognize the irony at exactly the same moment, because he started laughing too. "Oh wow," he said. "Right? That may be the funniest possible place. It feels almost aggressive. I wasn't trying to be. I know." The laughter lingered. Warm, unexpected, comfortable. Alice realized she was smiling. That felt strange. Not romantic. Not nostalgic. Just nice. Nice was unexpected. After a moment he spoke. "Only if you want to." She considered it. Coffee. Conversation. Closure. All the words that once terrified her. 10 years ago she would have worried about hidden meanings, signals, possibilities. Now she recognized a simpler truth. Sometimes adults had conversations. Sometimes unfinished chapters deserved endings. Or maybe beginnings. Who knew? Certainly not her. But she wasn't that indecisive woman anymore. She wasn't running from accountability. And she wasn't afraid of hearing difficult truths. "Okay," she said. "Okay. Coffee. Next Saturday?" Alice glanced toward Odin. The husky was now upside down on the floor. Whatever dignity he'd possessed had completely evaporated. "Saturday works. Then it's a date." The word slipped out. Both of them immediately stopped. A beat passed. Then Michael cleared his throat. "Not a date. Alice burst out laughing. "Oh, thank God. That came out horribly. It really did. I'm surprisingly relieved." "So am I." They were both laughing now. The awkwardness somehow making everything easier. When the laughter finally settled, Saturday remained. Time, place, an actual plan. After they said goodbye, Alice lowered her phone slowly. The room felt different. Not dramatically, just shifted. Like a door she'd assumed was locked had quietly opened. Odin waddled over and rested his head on her knee. She scratched behind his ears. "Well," the husky blinked. "I think I just agreed to walk directly into my own personal irony." Odin sneezed in her face. Alice groaned. The dog looked pleased with himself. For the first time all evening, she stopped staring at the phone number. She no longer needed it. Saturday was already waiting. And for the first time in a very long time, Alice genuinely had no idea what would happen next. Chapter 2. Coffee and Consequences. Saturday arrived with far less drama than Alice expected. No existential crisis. No panic attack. No last-minute cancellation. Just coffee. At least that was what she kept telling herself as she clipped Odin's leash on before their morning walk. The husky immediately trotted toward the front door with the enthusiasm of someone who had never gone for a walk before despite evidence to the contrary. "You're 7 years old," Alice informed him. Odin barked. "You've done this thousands of times." Another bark. Apparently he disagreed. The air felt cool and clean as they reached the park. Dawn was beginning to push the darkness aside, soft gold stretching across the horizon. Alice liked this time of day. It belonged to people who wanted to be here. Nobody dragged themselves out of bed at 5:30 in the morning for appearances. The walkers walked because they wanted to. The runners ran because they enjoyed it. And the dog owners accepted that certain furry dictators controlled their schedules. Odin suddenly stopped. Alice nearly walked into him. "What now?" The husky stared into a patch of bushes. Alice waited. Nothing happened. 5 full seconds passed. "Is there an actual emergency?" Odin continued staring. Then a rabbit exploded from the bushes. The husky jumped 3 feet in the air. The rabbit took off. Odin spun around in surprise. Alice burst out laughing. "You were literally looking at it." The dog looked offended, as if she had somehow arranged the entire situation. By the time they returned home, she felt calmer, grounded, which was good, because her coffee meeting was approaching faster than she would have liked. Not a date. Definitely not a date. She repeated that several times while getting ready. The fact that she felt the need to repeat it was mildly concerning. At 10 minutes before noon, she found herself standing outside a small coffee shop downtown. The place wasn't trendy. Thank God. No exposed brick. No artisanal oat milk lecture. No menu written exclusively in chalk and arrogance. Just coffee. Normal coffee. Alice stepped inside. The smell hit her immediately. Roasted beans and baked pastries. Comforting. Familiar. She scanned the room and found him almost immediately. Michael was seated near a window, reading something on his phone. For a moment she simply stood there. Not because he looked dramatically different. He looked older. So did she. That was how time worked. His hair showed hints of gray now. There were lines around his eyes. He looked stronger somehow. More settled. Less worried about proving anything. Then he glanced up. Their eyes met. And he smiled. The same smile. It hit her with surprising force. Michael stood. "Alice." She smiled automatically. "Hi." For one awkward second both seemed unsure whether a hug was appropriate. Then they simultaneously chose a handshake. Their hands met. Both immediately laughed. "This feels weird," she admitted. "Extremely weird. Right? We dated for 3 years and just shook hands. Like diplomats. Hostile diplomats. Negotiating a peace treaty." They laughed again. The tension eased. A little. They sat down. Coffee arrived shortly afterward. Small talk carried them through the first few minutes. Family updates, work stories, the harmless stuff. Then Michael leaned back slightly. So, Alice nodded. So, the word hung between them. Eventually she took a breath. I wasn't sure where to start. Neither was I. Helpful. I try. She smiled. Then became serious. I spent a long time angry with you. Michael nodded. I know. You do. I assumed. Fair. He looked into his coffee. You had every right to be. Alice slowly shook her head. No. The answer came immediately. Without hesitation. Without defensiveness. That alone showed how much she had changed. No, I didn't. Michael studied her for a moment. Then quietly asked, why? The answer wasn't simple. But it was honest. Because you were right. Silence. Not uncomfortable. Just heavy. I hated hearing it, Alice continued. At the time I thought you completely misunderstood what was happening. Michael said nothing. Listening. I convinced myself you were overreacting. That you didn't trust me. She laughed softly. Turns out you understood exactly what was happening before I did. His expression remained thoughtful. Alice looked down at her cup. I wasn't cheating. I know. The immediate answer surprised her. She looked up. Michael shrugged. I never thought you were. That caught her off guard. Then why leave? A sad smile appeared. Because I could see where things were going. The words sounded familiar. She remembered them from the letter. Back then she'd rejected them. Now she understood. Michael continued. You weren't malicious. That's what made it hard. Alice swallowed. I know. You genuinely thought everything was innocent. I did. You weren't trying to replace me. Alice laughed once. Not consciously. No. He shook his head. But you were making room for somebody else in your life while pushing me further outside of it. The statement wasn't accusatory. Just factual. And facts often hurt more than anger. Alice stared at her coffee. I know. For a moment neither spoke. Then she surprised herself. You know what finally taught me? Michael raised an eyebrow. What? The exact same thing happening to me. His eyes widened. Oh, yeah. Alice laughed. Not because it was funny. Because the absurdity still amazed her. It happened almost step for step. Michael leaned forward. Seriously. Seriously. She told him. Not every detail. Just enough. The closure conversation. The growing connection. The eventual breakup. The realization. Halfway through the story Michael covered his face. No way. Way. This is almost comically specific. I know. Life copied my homework. Pretty much. Michael laughed despite himself. I'm sorry. It's okay. No. I'm sorry that happened. Alice nodded. I know. For several seconds they both sat there smiling at the ridiculousness of it. Then Michael asked quietly, did it help? She knew what he meant. Understanding. Perspective. Growth. The painful lesson at the center of everything. Alice considered the question. Then nodded. Eventually. Yeah. It took a while. I imagine. At first I was just stunned. Michael smiled faintly. Welcome to the club. That earned a laugh. The conversation grew easier after that. The heavy truths had been spoken. No more avoiding them. No more dancing around old wounds. To Alice's surprise, she felt lighter. Not because she was forgiven. Because she finally understood. There was a difference. They spent another hour talking. Not about the breakup. About life. Current life. His sister. His nephew. The design projects Alice enjoyed. The absurd behavior of Odin. The little boy with foam swords from the Toy Store story. Apparently Michael's nephew currently believed he was a medieval knight. Last month he'd attempted to rescue a mailbox. Alice laughed so hard she nearly snorted coffee. You are absolutely making that up. I'm not. There is no way. He charged it with a pool noodle. Why? He thought it looked suspicious. Alice wheezed. Michael grinned. I have photographic evidence. When he showed her the picture, she laughed even harder. The boy looked completely serious, like a tiny warrior confronting darkness. Or federal property. It was difficult to tell. By the time they finally stood to leave, nearly 3 hours had passed. Neither had noticed. Outside, sunlight warmed the sidewalk. For a moment they stood there unsure of how to end things. The old uncertainty returned. Different now. Less painful. More human. Michael shoved his hands into his pockets. Well, we survived. Barely. I had confidence. I didn't. I could tell. Alice rolled her eyes. He smiled. Then his expression softened. I'm glad you called. The simple sincerity of it caught her off guard. She believed him. No hidden agenda. No pressure. Just honesty. I'm glad I did too. For a moment neither moved. Then Michael nodded. Take care of yourself, Alice. She smiled. You too. As he turned and walked away, she expected sadness. Regret. Something dramatic. Instead she felt something almost unexpected. Relief. Peace. The The conversation she'd spent years needing had finally happened. Whether it led anywhere else didn't matter. The chapter had finally closed, or so she thought, because when she reached home and opened her front door, she discovered Odin had somehow managed to steal an entire loaf of bread from the kitchen counter. The husky sat proudly in the middle of the living room, surrounded by crumbs, looking completely unrepentant. Alice stared. Odin stared back. Neither moved. Finally she sighed. Apparently closure is overrated. The dog wagged his tail. As usual, he disagreed. Chapter 3. Unexpected company. Monday morning arrived with all the enthusiasm of an unpaid tax bill. Alice stood in her kitchen holding a coffee mug while staring at Odin. Odin stared back. Between them sat the empty bread bag. Evidence. Damning evidence. Evidence the husky was pretending not to understand. A jury would convict you in 6 seconds. Odin yawned. Alice pointed at the bag. You stole an entire loaf of bread. The dog rolled onto his side. Apparently he had retained legal counsel. Alice shook her head and grabbed her purse. You're lucky you're cute. That finally earned a tail wag. The drive to work was uneventful, which was exactly how she liked it. Most people seemed to require constant stimulation. Podcasts, music, phone calls. Alice preferred silence. It gave her space to think, which turned out to be a mistake, because her thoughts immediately returned to Saturday. Not the apology, not the closure, the laughter. That was the unexpected part. The thing she kept replaying. The conversation had felt easy, natural, comfortable. There weren't many people left in her life she could say that about. By 41, most friendships required scheduling software and a blood sacrifice to arrange dinner. People became busy. Lives became complicated. Yet somehow 3 hours had disappeared without either of them noticing. Alice frowned. Her brain immediately tried to analyze that observation. She shut it down. No. A driver beside her glanced over strangely. Apparently she'd said that out loud. Wonderful. She focused on the road. Work thankfully offered a distraction. Her design firm occupied the 3rd floor of a renovated brick building downtown. The atmosphere was relaxed, creative, and mercifully free of office politics. Mostly, no workplace could entirely eliminate stupidity. Her friend Melissa was waiting near Alice's desk when she arrived. The grin was immediate, dangerously immediate. Oh no. Melissa followed Alice toward her chair. Oh yes. No. Absolutely yes. Alice dropped into her seat. You don't know anything. You met him. Alice froze. How do you know that? Melissa looked offended. You told me on Thursday. I did not tell you when. You told me enough. Alice sighed. Melissa had worked beside her for 7 years. The woman paid attention. Entirely too much attention. How did it go? Alice opened her computer. It was fine. Melissa stared. That was the most suspicious answer I've ever heard. It was fine. You spent almost 3 hours with him. Alice narrowed her eyes. How do you know that? You texted me before you left. And you texted me again when you got home. Alice's shoulders dropped. Right? Melissa swiveled her chair closer. 3 hours. It wasn't a date. I didn't say it was. You were thinking it. I was absolutely thinking it. Alice groaned. Melissa laughed. I'm kidding. No, you're not. That's fair. Alice shook her head. The conversation could have annoyed her. Instead, it amused her. Mostly because Melissa wasn't wrong. Not about the timing. About her curiosity. About the fact that Alice had thought about it more than she intended. Her friend studied her for a moment. Then gently asked, Did you get what you needed? That question surprised her. Because it wasn't teasing. It was sincere. Alice considered it carefully. Then nodded. Yeah. Melissa smiled. Good. The subject ended there. One of the reasons Alice valued the friendship was Melissa's ability to recognize boundaries. She could tease very aggressively, but she also knew when to stop. The workday moved quickly. Projects, meetings, client revisions, the normal rhythm she enjoyed. By the time 5 o'clock arrived, she felt mentally exhausted in the best possible way. Productive exhaustion, the satisfying kind. Her phone buzzed while she rode the elevator down. An unfamiliar sensation of anticipation followed, which annoyed her, because she already suspected who it might be. The message appeared as she stepped into the parking lot. Michael, I have a question. Alice laughed immediately. A second text arrived. It's important. Then another, potentially life-changing. Alice shook her head. People who spaced messages like that belonged on watch lists. She typed back. What did you do? The response came quickly. I told my nephew about Odin. Alice stopped walking. Why would you do that? I lacked wisdom. Clearly. 3 dots appeared. Then vanished. Then returned. Finally. He's demanding to meet the talking wolf. Alice stared at the message. Then laughed so hard a stranger looked over. The talking wolf. That sounded exactly like something a child would call a husky. Odin isn't a wolf. I tried explaining that. And, apparently I have no credibility. Alice reached her car. Still smiling. Tragic. Very. Anyway, I felt you should know there may now be a 7-year-old actively searching for a mythical talking wolf. I'll alert local authorities. Thank you. The conversation ended there. Brief, harmless. Yet Alice caught herself smiling all the way home, which annoyed her almost as much as the anticipation had. Life should not become complicated because of a fictional wolf investigation. Unfortunately, life rarely consulted her before becoming complicated. The next Sunday, she found herself back at her parents' house. Her father stood outside tending a grill. The smell of barbecue drifted through the afternoon air. Alice handed him a plate from the patio table. You know, Mom still thinks she's subtle. Her father laughed. No, she doesn't. Good. Your mother abandoned subtlety around 1986. Alice smiled. That sounded accurate. He flipped a burger, then glanced at her. So, Alice rolled her eyes. You're doing it too? What? The thing. What thing? The pretending not to ask before asking. Her father chuckled. I was going to ask how the meeting went. It went well. Good. That was it. No interrogation. No pushing. No agenda. Just good. One word. Simple. Like most of his wisdom. Alice leaned against the railing. For a moment they watched birds moving through nearby trees. Then her father spoke. You seem lighter. The observation caught her off guard. She looked at him. What does that mean? He shrugged. You smile more. Alice considered that. Maybe. Maybe not. She wasn't sure. Before she could answer, her mother's voice came from inside. Dinner is ready. Her father muttered something about military command structures. Alice laughed. Inside, the familiar chaos of family conversation filled the house. The comfortable kind. The kind she once feared she'd lose if she never married. That fear had vanished years ago. Marriage wasn't responsible for a full life. People were. Family, friends, community, purpose. Those things mattered. The realization had taken her a long time to reach. Later that evening, after dinner and several rounds of board game-related accusations, Alice headed home. The weekend had been calm, pleasant, normal, exactly what she preferred. Her phone buzzed again while she waited at a red light. The message preview appeared. Michael. Emergency update. Alice laughed immediately. Is the mailbox attacking again? The response arrived seconds later. Worse. She waited. He has drawn a map. Of what? The talking wolf's territory. Alice laughed so hard tears appeared in her eyes. The light turned green. She placed the phone aside and started driving. For the rest of the trip home, she couldn't stop smiling. And for the first time in years, Alice realized something unusual. She wasn't looking backward anymore. Not at old mistakes. Not at old heartbreak. Not at old regrets. The conversation she'd needed had already happened. The apology had been given. The lesson had been learned. Whatever came next wasn't about repairing the past. It was about the future. And that realization felt surprisingly nice, even if it apparently involved a child hunting her dog. Chapter 4. The Hunt for the Talking Wolf. Alice's first indication that something had gone terribly wrong arrived on a Wednesday morning. It came in the form of a child-sized knight charging across a park pathway with a foam sword raised over his head. There he is. Alice blinked. Odin barked. The knight accelerated. Alice recognized him instantly from the mailbox photograph. Brown hair, missing front tooth, unreasonable confidence. Michael's nephew. The boy skidded to a stop several feet away and pointed dramatically at Odin. The talking wolf. Alice looked down at her husky. The husky looked up at her. Neither appeared prepared for this encounter. A second later, another figure jogged around a corner. Michael, looking simultaneously amused and exhausted. There you are, he called toward the boy. The child ignored him. His attention remained locked on Odin. Alice laughed before she could stop herself. What happened to hunting quietly? The boy lowered his sword. His expression became serious. That was the plan. What changed? The boy pointed at Odin. He was bigger than I expected. Odin immediately trotted forward and shoved his nose into the boy's hand. The knight's face lit up. The battle was over. The talking wolf had won. Michael finally reached them, slightly out of breath. I'm sorry. Alice couldn't stop laughing. For what? For this. He gestured toward his nephew. The boy was now scratching Odin behind the ears. I found the map hidden under his bed. Alice raised an eyebrow. There was an actual map? There was. How detailed? Michael sighed. It included landmarks. No. It absolutely did. Alice laughed harder. The boy looked up. I used colors. Michael nodded gravely. He used colors. That's serious. It really was. The boy stood. I'm Ben. Alice offered her hand. Alice. He shook it confidently, then pointed at Odin. And that's Odin. Correct. The talking wolf. Alice opened her mouth, stopped, looked down at the husky. The dog was currently making dramatic whining noises at absolutely nothing. She reconsidered. I can see how you reached that conclusion. Ben nodded, satisfied. A mystery solved. The next 30 minutes vanished surprisingly quickly. Ben talked, constantly, About school. Dinosaurs. Nights. Space. Space nights. Dinosaur nights. Apparently there was considerable overlap. Alice mostly listened. Michael occasionally corrected particularly ambitious claims, such as the assertion that astronauts routinely fought dragons. Eventually Ben spotted a squirrel. Everything else immediately ceased to exist. The boy charged away. Foam sword raised. The squirrel fled. Michael watched him go. He has unlimited energy. Alice smiled. I noticed. I need whatever power source is keeping him operational. You and every parent on the planet. Michael chuckled. For a moment they simply stood together while Odin watched the squirrel hunt with professional interest. The quiet felt comfortable. Easy. Again. Alice found herself noticing that more often lately. Not the attraction. The comfort. That had always mattered more. The older she got, the less impressed she was by sparks and butterflies. Butterflies couldn't sustain a relationship. Communication could. Trust could. Shared values could. The realization came from experience. The expensive kind. Michael gestured toward a nearby bench. Want to sit for a minute? Alice nodded. Odin immediately sprawled across the grass at their feet. Claiming territory. As usual, they settled onto the bench. For several moments neither spoke. Ben continued his pursuit of woodland creatures in the distance. Then Michael glanced toward her. So, Alice smiled. That usually means you're about to ask something. I've been caught. Repeatedly. He laughed. Fair. A small pause followed. Then he asked, are your mornings always this exciting? Absolutely not. Good. I usually walk in complete silence while Odin evaluates every bush in the city. That sounds relaxing. It is. They watched Ben attempt diplomacy with a pigeon. The pigeon appeared unconvinced. Eventually Michael spoke again. I should probably admit something. Alice raised an eyebrow. That sounded dangerous. Okay. When your mother called. Wait, my mother called you? Not before you called me. Alice relaxed. Continue. He smiled. After. What about it? Michael looked vaguely embarrassed. She asked if we'd met. Alice closed her eyes. Of course she had. Of course. Please tell me she wasn't matchmaking. Technically. Oh no. Technically she said she was checking on old friends. Alice laughed. My mother lies with remarkable confidence. That explains a lot. It does. Michael smiled. Then became more thoughtful. She said something interesting. Alice waited. Michael's gaze shifted toward the pathway. She said she hadn't seen you this happy in years. The statement landed unexpectedly. Harder than she anticipated. Because it wasn't something she'd been hiding. It was something she'd never considered. Ha! That was all she managed. Michael shrugged. For what it's worth, I think she's wrong. Alice looked at him. You do? Yeah. He smiled faintly. I think you've probably been happy plenty of times. A small silence followed. Then he added, I think she's seeing peaceful and calling it happy. Alice stared at him, and once again found herself surprised by his ability to understand things she struggled to explain. Peaceful. That was exactly the word. Content. Grounded. Stable. Her life wasn't exciting, but it was good. Really good. At some point she'd stopped chasing happiness like it was a destination and started building a life she actually enjoyed living. Michael seemed to recognize her thoughts. His smile softened. I remember how hard you worked to improve yourself. Alice blinked. What? You always did. When? Even back then. Alice frowned. I don't think that's true. It absolutely is. She shook her head. You remember a different person. Michael laughed. No. I was a mess. You were. Alice stared. He held up a hand. That wasn't an insult. It sounded like one. You were a work in progress. So were you. Exactly. They both laughed. The honesty felt refreshing. No idealized memories. No pretending they were perfect. Life had sanded off those illusions years ago. Ben finally returned. Victorious. Apparently he'd negotiated peace with the pigeon. The details remained unclear. Soon afterward they headed toward the parking lot. On the way out, Ben walked beside Alice, then tugged lightly on her sleeve. She looked down. Yeah. The boy lowered his voice. Conspiratorially. My uncle smiles more now. Alice blinked. Before she could respond, Ben nodded importantly and hurried ahead, leaving her standing there, stunned. Michael had apparently missed the exchange. He was trying to convince Odin not to investigate a trash can. An impossible task. Alice watched them. Man and dog conducting negotiations neither intended to honor. A surprising warmth settled in her chest. Not because of romance. Not yet. Something simpler. Something more dangerous. Possibility. She recognized it immediately. And unlike the younger version of herself, she didn't rush toward it. Nor did she run away. She simply acknowledged it. Possibility existed. Nothing more. Nothing less. When they reached the parking lot, everyone paused. The familiar uncertainty appeared again. Not awkward. Gentle. Ben solved the problem immediately. We should do this again. Michael groaned. Subtle. What? The boy looked genuinely confused. Alice laughed. Michael covered his face. Ben pointed at Odin. The wolf agrees. Odin barked. Traitor. Alice shook her head. Apparently I'm outnumbered. Ben pumped a fist. Yes. Michael laughed. And as Alice drove home later, she found herself smiling at the memory. Not because she had fallen in love. That wasn't how mature relationships worked. Not for her. Not anymore. Love wasn't lightning. It wasn't fate. It wasn't grand declarations. Love, she suspected, was built much the same way trust was. One conversation. One shared laugh. One honest moment at a time. And for the first time in many years, she found herself curious enough to see what might happen next. Chapter 5. The difference between then and now. Alice had always believed that maturity arrived with certainty. It turned out maturity arrived with questions. Better questions. More honest questions. Questions that didn't have easy answers. The realization followed her through most of the next week. Not because anything dramatic happened. Quite the opposite. Life continued normally. Work remained busy. Odin remained convinced that all squirrels were criminal masterminds. Her parents remained incapable of subtle interference. Everything was ordinary. Except for one thing. Michael had quietly become part of her routine. Not in an overwhelming way. A text every few days. A shared joke. An occasional photograph from Ben's latest adventure. Nothing excessive. Nothing consuming. And that, Alice realized, was exactly why it felt different. There was no pressure. No guessing games. No wondering where she stood. No pretending disinterest while secretly hoping for attention. At 41, she no longer had the patience for any of that nonsense. Thursday afternoon found her standing in line at a grocery store. She had exactly 4 items in her basket. Milk, eggs, chicken, dog treats. A woman ahead of her somehow possessed enough groceries to survive a harsh winter. Alice sighed. Her phone buzzed. A text appeared. Michael, I need an expert opinion. Alice smiled. That sounds serious. It is. Proceed. Several seconds passed. Then a photo arrived. It showed Ben holding 2 wildly different Halloween costume options. A knight and an astronaut. Alice laughed. Why am I the expert? I've been informed you're unbiased. That's an outrageous accusation. Can you help or not? Alice studied the picture. Then typed, Knight astronaut. Is that an option? Anything is an option if you're brave enough. The response took longer. Then he likes this answer. You're welcome. Another pause. He's already drawing modifications. Alice shook her head. God help you. It's too late for me. The woman in front of Alice finally reached the register. Progress. At last. Yet even after the conversation ended, Alice remained smiling. The cashier noticed. Good day. Alice glanced up. I think so. The teenager nodded wisely. Nice. It was such a simple exchange. Yet halfway home Alice found herself thinking about it. A good day. When had she stopped having those? Not completely, but consistently. Somewhere along the way life had become about surviving disappointments rather than appreciating good moments. That had changed over the past few years, and she wasn't eager to lose it. Saturday morning brought another park walk. This one planned. Michael and Ben arrived 10 minutes late. Ben sprinted ahead immediately, carrying a foam sword. Again, apparently chivalry never rested. Michael looked tired. The kind of tired adults wore when responsibility accumulated faster than sleep. Alice noticed. So, he groaned. So, you look terrible. Thank you. I like honesty. I got 3 hours of sleep. What happened? Michael pointed toward Ben. The boy was attempting to recruit Odin into some sort of military campaign. Alice nodded. Fair. Michael rubbed his eyes. He discovered documentaries. Oh no. Exactly. What kind? Dinosaur documentaries. Alice laughed. The answer explained everything. He now has questions. I'm afraid to ask. You should be. They began walking. Odin moved beside them while Ben marched 20 feet ahead, frequently announcing important tactical discoveries. Most involved sticks. Eventually Alice glanced toward Michael. You okay? The question slipped out naturally. Not politeness. Concern. Michael seemed surprised by it, then smiled. Yeah. A pause. Actually, yeah. Something in his voice convinced her. Not perfect. Not effortless. But honest. That mattered. The path curved around a small pond. Morning sunlight reflected across the water. For a while they simply walked. Comfortable silence. No need to fill every second. Alice appreciated that. Years ago silence had intimidated her. Now she valued it. Eventually Michael spoke. I owe you an apology. She blinked. What? His expression turned thoughtful. I don't think I ever gave you enough credit. Alice slowed slightly. For what? For learning. The statement surprised her. Michael continued before she could respond. After we broke up, I spent a long time angry. Alice didn't interrupt. I wasn't angry that you talked to your ex. His gaze remained on the pathway. I was angry because I thought you didn't understand why it mattered. Alice swallowed. He wasn't wrong. Back then, she hadn't. Michael smiled faintly. But your mother told me some things. Alice groaned. Oh no. He laughed. Nothing embarrassing. I don't believe that. Fair. His smile remained. She told me how hard you worked on yourself. Alice looked away. Uncomfortable. Praise always felt odd. Especially praise she didn't think she deserved. Michael seemed to notice. See? What? That. That what? You still do that. Alice frowned. Do what? Act like growth happened accidentally. She stared. Michael shrugged. It didn't. For several moments she didn't know what to say, because the words landed harder than expected. Not romantic. Respectful. And somehow that meant more. Ahead of them Ben suddenly stopped. Danger. Both adults looked up. The boy pointed dramatically toward a goose. The goose stared back, entirely unimpressed. Michael sighed immediately. Oh no. Alice laughed. The goose took a step forward. Ben raised his sword. The goose took another step. Michael accelerated. Absolutely not. What? You are not dueling wildlife. But, no. The kingdom. No. The people need. Michael picked him up. The goose won. Alice laughed so hard she had tears in her eyes. Ben looked betrayed. The goose knows what it did. Maybe, Michael agreed. But we're leaving anyway. The remainder of the walk passed in similar fashion. Light, easy, funny. And somewhere in the middle of all that simplicity, something quietly shifted. Not a dramatic realization. Not a cinematic moment. Nothing that obvious. Just awareness. Alice looked at Michael while he argued with his nephew about goose-related diplomacy. And she recognized something she hadn't felt in years. Trust. Not complete trust. Trust took time. But the beginning of it. The foundation. And perhaps more importantly, she realized why. Michael wasn't trying to impress her. He wasn't selling a version of himself. There was no performance. No charm offensive. Just honesty. The same quality that had drawn her to him years ago. The same quality she'd been too immature to truly appreciate. When the walk finally ended, they stopped near the parking lot. Ben was busy explaining medieval law enforcement to Odin. The dog appeared skeptical. Michael glanced toward her. You free next weekend? There it was. A simple question. Simple enough that younger versions of herself would have complicated it. Wondered what it meant. Analyzed every syllable. Now she simply asked, why? His grin appeared immediately. See? That's healthy. I'm learning. Apparently. He pointed toward Ben. My sister is taking him for the weekend. Congratulations. Thank you. And I thought maybe you and I could have dinner. Alice watched him carefully. Not because she needed to decode hidden intentions. Because she appreciated that he wasn't hiding them. Dinner. Not accidental. Not ambiguous. Not disguised as something else. Just dinner. A clear invitation. Given honestly. The way mature adults should do things. The realization made her smile. Are you asking me on a date? Michael laughed. Yes. That's probably smarter than pretending otherwise. I thought so. Alice considered him for another second. Then nodded. Okay. His smile widened. Okay. Okay. For a moment neither spoke. The answer settling between them. Simple. Comfortable. Real. Not because the past had disappeared. It hadn't. Not because old mistakes no longer mattered. They did. The difference was that both of them had learned from them. And perhaps that was what made second chances possible. Not forgetting the past. Growing beyond it. As Alice headed home later, with Odin sprawled across the back seat and drooling on her upholstery, she found herself smiling again. This time she didn't overthink it. Didn't analyze it. Didn't question it. For once, she simply allowed herself to enjoy the feeling. Because after everything life had taught her, she'd finally learned something important. The right person never required guessing. Chapter 6. First Dates and Honest Answers. Alice spent entirely too much time deciding what to wear. It annoyed her. Not because she couldn't decide. Because she cared. That realization arrived while she stood in front of her bedroom mirror holding two perfectly acceptable sweaters. Neither was wrong. Neither was dramatically different from the other. Yet somehow this decision had become important. You're 41, she informed her reflection. The reflection offered no useful feedback. Odin wandered into the room. He examined both sweaters, then sat down. Excellent. You've contributed nothing. The husky yawned. Alice eventually chose the blue sweater. Not because it looked better. Because she was tired of having an argument with clothing. Half an hour later she was driving toward the restaurant Michael had selected. Not fancy. Not trendy. Just a locally owned Italian place with good food and a reputation for reasonable portions. The choice itself told her something. Neither of them was interested in performance. That felt nice. When she arrived, Michael was already there. Waiting near the entrance. As soon as he spotted her, he smiled. And just like that, some of her nervousness disappeared. Not all of it. Enough. Hi. Hi. For a brief second they stood there. Both smiling. Both suddenly aware that this was different than coffee. Different than park walks. Different than accidental meetings involving medieval wildlife enforcement. This was a date. An actual date. The hostess saved them from further awkwardness. 2. Michael nodded gratefully. Please. They followed her to a table near the back. Menus appeared. Water arrived. Silence settled. A very specific kind of silence. The kind created when two adults were trying not to acknowledge they were on a first date despite the fact they were obviously on a first date. Finally, Alice laughed. Michael immediately pointed at her. Thank you. What? For breaking first. I wasn't aware we were competing. We absolutely were. She smiled. How old are you again? Old enough to know this feels weird. It does. Michael relaxed slightly. I'm glad it's not just me. No, definitely not just you. The tension dissolved. Mostly. At least enough for normal conversation. After they ordered, the discussion drifted naturally from topic to topic. Travel, books, family stories, terrible haircuts from their 20s. The last subject generated an alarming amount of material. I had frosted tips. Alice nearly dropped her fork. No. Yes. You voluntarily chose that? It was a dark period. I'm struggling to respect you. That's fair. She laughed. Michael shook his head. You had questionable choices too. I deny everything. You had an entire collection of platform sandals. Her eyes widened. You remember that? You owned 6 pairs. That's an unreasonable memory. You wore them constantly. Alice covered her face. Dear God. Exactly. And yet you dated me anyway, against all logic. The laughter came easily, the same as before. But tonight there was something else beneath it. Intent. Both knew why they were here. Neither was pretending. As the meal continued, the conversation deepened. Not abruptly, gradually, the way genuine conversations often did. At one point Michael set down his glass, then looked at her thoughtfully. Can I ask something? You can ask. Will you answer? Depends on the question. He smiled. Fair. A brief pause followed. Then his expression became more serious. Why did you stop dating? The question wasn't accusatory, just curious. Still, Alice took her time answering. Because the truthful answer mattered. I got tired. Michael nodded slowly. She continued. Not of relationships. Of everything that came before them. Recognition appeared immediately in his eyes. The apps, the endless first meetings, the rehearsed conversations, the optimism followed by disappointment. The cycle. You know what finally got me? Alice asked. What? The repetition. Michael laughed softly. Oh, I know exactly what you mean. She smiled. Everybody thinks they're unique. They're not. They really aren't. They use the same lines, the exact same lines. They laughed. Then Alice became thoughtful. Eventually I realized I was happier by myself than I was with most of the people I met. Michael nodded. That's actually healthy. It felt unhealthy. Why? Because everyone acts like being alone is a problem. His expression immediately softened. That's because most people are terrified of their own company. The answer surprised her. Mostly because she agreed. Alice looked down at her plate, then back at him. I genuinely like my life. Michael smiled. Good. No, I mean it. I know. Her voice became quieter. I worked hard to build it. For a moment neither spoke. Then Michael nodded once. I know you did. The simple acknowledgement stirred something unexpectedly emotional inside her. Because he understood what she meant. Not the details, the effort, the years, the growth, all of it. The waiter interrupted with dessert menus. Neither needed dessert. Both ordered anyway. That felt appropriate. Eventually the conversation shifted toward Michael. Alice studied him across the table. My turn. He sighed dramatically. Here we go. She ignored that. Why haven't you gotten married? Michael blinked. Straight to prison questions. You can survive. He laughed. Then considered her question. Long enough that she suspected he was answering honestly. Not carefully. Honestly. Finally he shrugged. A lot of reasons. Such as. The biggest one? She nodded. Michael leaned back slightly. I stopped searching. That wasn't the answer she'd expected. What does that mean? It means I wasn't willing to force something because I was lonely. The statement landed immediately. Because she understood it. Completely. Michael smiled faintly. I went on dates. A few. A few. Alice raised an eyebrow. More than a few? Enough. She laughed. He continued. But after a while I realized that wanting a relationship wasn't enough. No. It doesn't make the wrong relationship right. That sounded familiar. Not because she'd heard him say it. Because life had taught her the same lesson. They shared a look. One built on mutual understanding. The kind earned through experience. The expensive kind. Outside, darkness had fallen. The restaurant had grown quieter. Around them people came and went. Yet neither seemed eager to end the evening. Eventually Alice noticed the time. And laughed. Michael saw her expression. What? We've been here almost 3 hours. He looked at his watch. Then groaned. Not again. She laughed harder. It's becoming a habit. It might be. A comfortable silence followed. Neither rushing, neither avoiding. Finally Michael folded his hands on the table, then asked a question so quietly she almost missed it. Are you glad you said yes? Alice didn't need to think about it. Yes. The answer came immediately, automatically, truthfully. Something warm appeared in his expression. Good. She smiled. What about you? Michael laughed. Alice. What? I asked you out. That's not an answer. No, it isn't. He shook his head, then smiled. I'm very glad you said yes. The honesty settled gently between them. No games, no ambiguity, just truth. And for perhaps the first time since she'd started dating again all those years ago, Alice realized she wasn't nervous about what happened next. Not because she knew the future. She didn't. Not because there were guarantees. There weren't. She felt calm because whatever happened next would be built honestly. One conversation at a time. One choice at a time. One date at a time. And after everything she'd learned, that felt like exactly the right place to start. Chapter 7. What fear looks like now. The strange thing about starting over at 41, Alice discovered, was that fear looked completely different than it had at 25. At 25, fear had been dramatic. Fear meant rejection, embarrassment, heartbreak, failure. At 41, fear was quieter, less obvious, more practical. Fear was finding something good and wondering if you were brave enough to trust it. That realization followed Alice through the next several weeks. Not because anything went wrong, because everything kept going right. That was what made it unsettling. She and Michael continued seeing each other. Not every day. Neither of them had the time or desire for that. Their lives already existed before they re-entered each other's orbit. Work, family, responsibilities, routines. The relationship grew around those things instead of replacing them. And somehow that made it stronger. One Saturday afternoon they found themselves attending one of Ben's soccer games. Alice hadn't planned on becoming the sort of woman who voluntarily watched children's sports. Life had other ideas. The game was chaos, pure chaos. Children ran in clusters. The ball spent long stretches being ignored. One boy became fascinated by a butterfly. Another sat down in the grass halfway through the game. Alice wasn't entirely certain everyone understood the objective. Ben, however, was fully committed. He charged across the field with determination. 3 minutes later, he accidentally kicked the ball backward. His heart is in the right place, Michael shouted. Alice laughed. Several parents turned to look. Michael looked unapologetic. It's an important quality. Ben immediately corrected course and resumed his campaign. The score remained unclear. The rules appeared optional. Everyone seemed happy. At halftime, Ben sprinted toward them, sweaty, excited, missing one shin guard. Did you see that? Michael nodded solemnly. Every second. I almost scored. You absolutely did. Ben looked at Alice. Did you see? I did. His grin brightened. Then he ran off again before either adult could ask where the missing shin guard had gone. Michael watched him leave. He's exhausting. You adore him. I do. Something in his voice softened. The affection wasn't performative or exaggerated. It was genuine. Alice found herself smiling. She liked seeing the side of him. Maybe because it revealed something important. Character rarely appeared during life's easy moments. It showed up in responsibility, commitment, consistency, the things nobody applauded, the things that mattered most. After the game, they stopped at a nearby sandwich shop. Ben spent most of the meal describing strategic errors committed by his teammates. A tragic lack of planning. Michael nearly choked on his drink. You're 8. Exactly. Alice laughed. Later, when Michael dropped Ben back at his sister's house, Alice waited in the car. The sun was beginning to set. Golden light stretched across the neighborhood. Children rode bicycles. Sprinklers hissed in distant yards. Ordinary life. The kind she'd spent years appreciating. Michael returned a few minutes later. As soon as he sat down, she noticed it. The shift in his expression. Not bad. Thoughtful. You okay? He glanced toward her, then smiled faintly. Yeah. The answer sounded incomplete. Not dishonest. Incomplete. Alice waited. Eventually he sighed. My sister asked me something. Oh. Exactly. She laughed. What was it? Michael started the car. She wanted to know if I'm serious about you. The words settled into the quiet interior. Alice felt a small flutter inside her chest. Not panic. Awareness. This mattered. Michael kept his eyes on the road. Then added quietly, I told her yes. The flutter grew. For several moments neither spoke. Traffic rolled steadily around them. The world continued normally. Yet the conversation felt important. Finally Alice asked, Are you? Michael glanced at her briefly. His expression held no hesitation. Yes. The certainty in his answer caught her off guard. Not because it was too much. Because it wasn't. It was measured. Intentional. Honest. Exactly like him. Alice looked out the window, thinking, Years ago she would have felt pressure. The need to match the moment. To immediately reciprocate. To provide reassurance. Now she understood something she hadn't understood in her 20s. Honesty mattered more than timing. Michael seemed to know that. Because he didn't push. Didn't fill the silence. Didn't ask for anything. Eventually she spoke. I'm serious too. His shoulders relaxed. Just slightly. Yet she noticed. And unexpectedly, that small reaction touched her more than any grand romantic gesture could have. Because it revealed something vulnerable. Something real. They drove another few blocks before Michael laughed suddenly. Alice looked over. What? He shook his head. I just realized something. Should I be worried? Possibly. Michael. He smiled. When we were younger, this conversation would have become an argument. She blinked. Then laughed. Because he was right. Painfully right. Younger versions of themselves would have complicated everything. Overanalyzed every word. Created misunderstandings from nothing. Defended positions nobody was attacking. Alice shook her head. That's depressing. It's growth. It's depressing growth. I'll accept that. They both smiled. A comfortable silence followed. When they reached her house, neither rushed to leave. The car remained parked. The engine off. The evening quiet around them. Alice looked toward her front yard. The porch light was already on. Odin's silhouette visible through the front window. Standing watch. Or demanding dinner. With him it was difficult to tell. Michael followed her gaze. He missed you. It's been 2 hours. That's basically abandonment. To a husky, maybe. Definitely to a husky. She laughed. Then glanced back toward him. The moment stretched slightly. Not awkward. Gentle. The kind of moment that existed when two people stopped trying to figure out whether something was happening and finally admitted that it already was. Michael smiled. I had a really good day. Alice felt warmth spread through her chest. Me too. The words came easily. Because they were true. Not manufactured. Not romanticized. Simple truth. Michael hesitated. Then asked quietly, Can I kiss you? Alice stared at him. For one brief second she was genuinely speechless. Not because of the question. Because he had asked. The younger version of her would have missed the significance. The current version didn't. Respect. Communication. Clarity. Small things. Important things. The foundation beneath everything else. A smile slowly appeared. Yes. His answering smile was immediate. Warm. Relieved. Happy. And when he leaned toward her, the kiss felt remarkably similar to everything else that had happened between them recently. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Not complicated. Just right. When it ended, both laughed softly. The nervousness finally breaking. That went better than the handshake, Alice said. Michael groaned. Why would you remind me of that? Because it was awful. It really was. I still can't believe we shook hands. We panicked. You panicked. We panicked. She laughed. The sound lingering between them. Comfortable. Familiar. Real. As Alice walked toward her front door a few minutes later, she realized something important. For years she'd believed maturity meant learning how not to make mistakes. Life had eventually corrected that misconception. Maturity wasn't about avoiding every mistake. It was about recognizing them, learning from them, choosing better when the opportunity returned. And standing on her porch, while Odin howled dramatically through the window and Michael waved from the driveway, Alice found herself grateful for every lesson that had brought her here. Even the painful ones, especially the painful ones, because without them, she never would have recognized something good when it finally arrived. Chapter 8. The chapter they chose. 3 months later, Alice stood in her parents' kitchen watching her mother attempt to look innocent. It wasn't going well. Her mother was smiling far too much. Nobody smiled that much without a reason, especially not Alice's mother. What did you do? Her mother placed a serving bowl onto the dining table. I have no idea what you're talking about. A dangerous answer. Alice narrowed her eyes. Mom. Yes. What did you do? Her father appeared from the living room carrying a tray. One look at his expression told Alice everything. He was trying not to laugh, which meant her mother was absolutely guilty. Don't drag me into this, he said. I haven't said anything yet. Exactly. Traitor. Her father continued walking. I've been married a long time. Survival requires adaptation. Alice shook her head. Some things never changed. Honestly, she was thankful for that. The past few months had brought enough change already. Good change. Unexpected change. The kind she hadn't realized she wanted until it arrived. A voice sounded from the front entryway. We're here, Michael. A smile immediately appeared before she could stop it. Her mother noticed. Of course she did. MHM. Alice pointed at her. Don't. I didn't say anything. You were thinking it loudly. Her mother's grin widened. A moment later Michael entered the kitchen carrying a dessert container while Ben followed close behind. Odin followed Ben. Because Ben was carrying snacks. The Husky's loyalty had proven surprisingly affordable. Ben raised a hand dramatically. Greetings. Alice laughed. Hello, Knight. I am now a space knight. Ah, promotion. Congratulations. Thank you. Michael shook his head. He made business cards. No. Yes. Ben immediately produced one from a pocket. Alice accepted it. The card had clearly been handmade. Crayons, stars, a drawing of a sword attached to a rocket. Space Knight Ben. Below that, Defender of Stuff. Alice completely lost any remaining composure. Michael wasn't far behind. Even her father laughed. Ben accepted the praise with professional dignity. I have a logo now. I can see that. Business matters settled. Everyone moved toward the dining room. Lunch quickly became the usual mix of conversation, stories, interruptions, and gentle chaos. Exactly the kind of gathering Alice loved. At one point she found herself simply watching. Her father talking with Michael. Her mother fussing over everyone equally. Ben performing dramatic reenactments of soccer victories that may or may not have occurred. The familiar warmth of family. And for the first time she noticed something interesting. Michael fit naturally. Not because anyone was forcing it. Not because people were pretending. He simply belonged. The realization settled quietly inside her. Comfortably. After lunch, everyone migrated toward the backyard. The autumn air felt cool and pleasant. Leaves drifted lazily from nearby trees. Ben immediately recruited Odin into another quest. This one apparently involved recovering a stolen treasure chest. Alice suspected the treasure chest was a flower pot. Facts seemed flexible. She sat beside Michael on the patio. For a few minutes they simply watched the ongoing adventure. Then Michael smiled. Your dad still scares me. Alice laughed. What? He has that look. What look? The one where he seems to know everything. He usually does. Exactly. She smiled. I think he likes you. I hope so. He does. Michael glanced toward her. You sound pretty confident. I am. A comfortable silence followed. Then she added, he liked you before. Michael looked away toward the yard. Thoughtful. I wasn't sure. He did. A faint smile appeared. That's nice to hear. The conversation faded again. Not because there was nothing left to say. Because neither felt obligated to fill every moment. That had become one of Alice's favorite things about them. Nothing required effort. Tension? Yes. Communication? Absolutely. Effort? No. The relationship wasn't work. Life was work. Relationships should make life better. Not harder. The understanding had taken decades to learn. Benjamin's sudden shout interrupted her thoughts. We found it. Everyone looked over. The treasure chest was indeed a flower pot. Alice silently congratulated herself. Michael laughed. I think the kingdom has been saved. For now. We'll remain vigilant. Naturally. Another hour passed. Then another. By late afternoon, the gathering began winding down. Dishes were packed. Goodbyes started. Ben hugged everyone with the enthusiasm of a child powered entirely by sugar and momentum. Eventually only Alice and Michael remained in the driveway. The familiar pause appeared. Neither seemed eager to rush away. Alice felt the cool breeze across her face. Nearby, Odin was already asleep on the grass. Completely exhausted from defending the kingdom. Or stealing snacks. Possibly both. Michael followed her gaze. He had a big day. Tough work being a wolf. Talking wolf, right? He smiled. Then looked at her. Really looked at her. And suddenly his expression changed. Not dramatic. Not nervous. Just serious. The kind of serious that made her pay attention. Alice. Yeah. For a moment he seemed to gather his thoughts. Then he laughed softly. I had this whole speech prepared. She immediately started smiling. Oh no. Yeah. Was it a bad speech? It got worse every time I practiced it. That's encouraging. Michael shook his head. Then stepped closer. Not rushed. Not hesitant. Simply certain. And after everything they'd learned, certainty looked a lot different than it once had. I wasted a lot of years thinking about what I'd say if I ever saw you again. Alice blinked. The admission caught her off guard. Michael continued. Then I actually saw you again. A smile touched his lips. And absolutely none of those speeches mattered. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. Not from sadness. From honesty. Honesty always carried weight. He reached for her hand. She let him. I don't think we're the same people we were back then. No. We shouldn't be. A quiet laugh escaped her. No. Michael gently squeezed her hand. But I think we're finally the people we needed to become. The words settled between them. Simple. True. Alice looked at him. At the man she'd loved once. Lost. Learned from. Found again. Not because fate intervened. Not because destiny had a plan. Because two flawed people grew up. Because life taught hard lessons. Because they were brave enough to try again after understanding why things failed the first time. And perhaps most importantly, because neither was pretending anymore. I think so too, she said. Michael smiled. A real smile. The kind she trusted. The kind built from years instead of moments. For several seconds neither moved. Neither needed to. The answer was already there. Not in grand declarations. Not in promises. In choices. Daily choices. Future choices. The life they were quietly building one conversation at a time. And standing there in her parents' driveway, with a sleeping husky nearby and laughter spilling faintly from the house behind them, Alice realized something. Years ago she thought love was finding the right person. Life had taught her differently. Love was becoming the right person. Then having the courage to recognize someone who had done the same. And for the first time in a very long time, the future didn't feel uncertain. Felt welcome.